Ethan Walker was a man who had spent most of his life in silence. He lived alone in a small cabin near the edge of the Arizona desert, far from the noise of towns or roads. His neighbors were miles away, and the only sounds he usually heard were the wind against the dry grass and the slow murmur of the river that curved near his land. He was in his mid-30s, tall, quiet, and strong from years of work. But there was something in his eyes that looked distant, like someone who had been left behind by life itself. He wasn't a bad man. In fact, most people who had met him said he was kind and honest. But Ethan never talked much. He had no wife, no close friends, and no one waiting for him when he came home at night. Some said he chose it that way. Others believed something in his past had made him close his heart for good. The truth was simpler. Ethan didn't know how to belong to anyone. He had lived through too many years of silence and had grown used to being alone. Every evening, when the sun began to fall and the heat turned softer, he would walk down the dusty trail to the river. The San Pedro River was his one constant companion, a quiet line of silver water moving slowly through the red land. He liked to sit on the smooth stones and watch the ripples change color under the sky. The river didn't ask questions. It didn't judge him. It simply flowed as it always had, and Ethan found comfort in that. He didn't think anyone ever noticed him on those walks. He didn't expect them to. But one late afternoon, when the wind carried the smell of rain and the light was turning gold across the water, Ethan saw someone he didn't expect to see. A young woman was kneeling by the riverbank, filling a gourd with water. Her long dark hair fell over her shoulder, and she wore a woven dress with small beads that caught the light. She looked calm, focused, as if the world around her didn't exist. Ethan stopped walking. He didn't want to disturb her, and he wasn't sure what to do. He had seen Apache families before, living a few miles to the north, but he had never spoken to any of them. The woman seemed alone, though, and that made him uneasy. In this land, being alone could be dangerous. Coyotes wandered close to the river, and sometimes strangers passed through who didn't mean well. Still, he hesitated. He didn't want to frighten her or make her think he meant harm. He took a slow step forward, then another, his boots crunching softly on the sand. The woman looked up. Her eyes were dark, steady, and calm. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the water running between them. Ethan lifted his hat slightly, a polite gesture he'd used all his life. "Evenin'," he said quietly. His voice came out rough from disuse. The woman didn't speak right away. She studied him as if she were trying to read something in his face. Then she said, "The river belongs to all." Her tone wasn't sharp, just certain, like a statement of truth. Ethan nodded. "Didn't mean to intrude," he replied, keeping his voice low. "Just passing through." She gave a small nod, her eyes never leaving his. There was no fear in her gaze, only calm confidence. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Most people avoided his eyes, but she didn't. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't quite name. He wanted to say something else, but the words wouldn't come. So after a few seconds, he tipped his hat again and turned to leave. As he walked away, he could still feel her gaze on his back. It followed him like warmth, steady and quiet. When he reached the bend in the river, he turned slightly, almost without meaning to. She was still there, standing now, the water touching her ankles. She raised her hand in a small wave. Not a greeting or a goodbye, but something softer, something human. Ethan hesitated, then gave a small nod before walking on. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the wind against the walls of his cabin. His mind kept replaying that moment by the river, the calmness in her eyes, the steadiness in her voice. He told himself it was nothing. She was just being polite, just someone from the nearby camp fetching water. But deep down he knew it was more than that. For the first time in years, someone had looked at him not as a stranger or a ghost of a man, but as a person. The next day he tried to keep his mind on his work. He chopped wood, fixed a loose fence, and fed his horse. But when the afternoon light turned golden again, his steps led him down the familiar trail toward the river. He told himself it was only for the peace of it, only to watch the water again. But his heart was not as sure. When he reached the bank, she wasn't there. The place was empty except for a few footprints by the shore. He stood there a long while, listening to the wind and the sound of the river. It should have felt like every other day, but it didn't. He realized how strange it was to miss someone he barely knew. The days that followed were quiet again, but not in the same way. The silence now had an echo to it, a memory that lived inside him. He noticed small things more clearly: the shimmer of the water, the sound of a hawk overhead, the coolness of the evening air. It was as if meeting her had reminded him that the world was still alive, still full of connection, even if he had forgotten how to reach for it. A week later, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, he saw her again. This time she was standing on the far side of the river, a small bundle of herbs in her hands. She didn't seem surprised to see him. Their eyes met, and though neither spoke, the moment stretched between them like a bridge. He nodded once, and she smiled faintly before turning back to her task. That night, as he walked home, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. He didn't understand what was happening or why her presence lingered in his thoughts, but he didn't fight it. For years he had walked that riverbank as a man untouched by the world, content with his solitude. Now for the first time he felt the edges of that solitude begin to soften. It wasn't love, not yet, and it wasn't a story meant for others to talk about. It was something smaller but deeper, a quiet reminder that even a lonely man could still be seen, still be part of something living. He didn't know her name and she didn't know his story, but in that brief meeting something within him had changed. The next morning he rose before dawn. The air was cool and mist hung low over the river. Ethan stood by the bank watching the first light touch the water. He didn't expect her to come, yet part of him hoped she might. For the first time in a long while he didn't feel invisible. The world seemed open again, like the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. And as the river flowed on, Ethan felt the weight of years begin to lift, carried away quietly by the same current that had once been his only friend. Days passed slowly after that second sighting. Ethan tried to tell himself that it was just a passing thing, a small meeting by the river that didn't mean anything. But the truth was, he found himself thinking about her more than he wanted to admit. When he worked on his fence, her calm eyes came to mind. When he sat by the fire at night, he remembered her standing by the river, her hair moving in the wind, her small smile that said nothing yet carried a kind of peace. He didn't even know her name. He just knew that she was Apache, and that meant she lived with her people not far from the northern woods. He didn't plan to disturb them. He had no right. Still, every evening when the sun turned soft and golden, Ethan walked back to the river. At first, he told himself he was only checking the traps he had set or watching for wild animals, but deep down he knew the truth. He was hoping to see her again. On the fourth day, when the sky burned orange with sunset, he finally did. She was kneeling by the water again, her hands moving gently through the surface as if she were washing something precious. Ethan stopped a few steps away, unsure whether to speak. She looked up, saw him, and this time she didn't seem surprised. Instead, she gave a quiet nod, the same kind of greeting he had come to expect from her. Simple, honest, without fear. He returned the nod, trying to look calm, though his heart was beating harder than usual. "Evenin'," he said softly. "Evenin'," she replied. Her voice carried easily across the quiet air. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she stood and looked at him, curious. "You walk here every day?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Most days. Helps me think." "What do you think about?" Ethan looked down at the sand near his boots. "Mostly nothing, just the world." She smiled slightly, a small curve at the corner of her lips. "Then you think like the river. It also moves without hurry." Ethan looked up again, meeting her eyes. He didn't know why, but her words made something tighten in his chest. "You talk about the river like it's alive." "It is," she said. "Everything that moves is alive." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he only nodded. She went back to her work, tying the gourd closed, while Ethan stood quietly, watching the reflection of the sky in the water. He wanted to say more, but words didn't come easily to him. Most of his life had been built in silence, and he didn't know how to open himself without stumbling. After a while, she looked back at him and said, "My name is Tala." The name suited her, soft but strong, like the river that shaped the land. He nodded again, feeling awkward but warm inside. "Ethan," he said simply. She repeated it under her breath as if testing how it sounded. "Ethan," she said again, this time with a gentle tone that made him feel like his name mattered for the first time in years. The wind picked up, rustling through the reeds, carrying the smell of water and dust. They stood in silence for a few moments, and then she said, "You live alone." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Yes, why? He didn't expect that. Most people never asked personal questions, especially not so directly. But there was no judgment in her voice, only curiosity. He thought for a moment, trying to find the right words. Guess I just never found a reason not to. Tala tilted her head slightly, studying him. That sounds like you are still looking for a reason. He didn't know what to say to that either. She wasn't wrong. There had been a time when he thought he might marry, build a family, live like other men. But life had gone another way. Work, silence, years that slipped past like sand through fingers. He had learned to live without expecting much. Tala bent down to pick up her bundle, then looked at him again. You will walk here tomorrow? He nodded slowly. I might, she smiled faintly. Then I might also. And with that, she turned and walked along the riverbank, her steps light and sure. Ethan watched until she disappeared among the cottonwood trees. Then he stood there a while longer, feeling the quiet press around him. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. The next evening, he came again. So did she. It became a pattern. Every day, just as the light began to fade, they met at the river. They talked about small things at first. The weather, the animals, the way the clouds looked before rain. She told him about the herbs she gathered for her grandmother, and the stories her tribe told about the stars. Ethan listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes just nodding. He told her a little about his work fixing fences and tending horses. It wasn't much, but to him it felt like a kind of confession. Over time, he noticed things about her that he hadn't at first. The way she looked at the sky before speaking. The way her fingers traced the edges of the water when she was thinking. The sound of her soft laughter that seemed to blend with the river. He found comfort in her presence, though he never said so. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank together, she suddenly stopped and pointed to the ground. A small snake was coiled near Ethan's boot, its body tense, ready to strike. Before he could react, Tala reached out and pulled him back by the arm. The snake hissed and slid away into the brush. Ethan stared at her hand on his sleeve, surprised not by the danger but by the touch itself. Her grip was firm but gentle. When she realized she was still holding him, she let go slowly, her fingers brushing against his skin. You should watch where you step, she said softly, her voice calm. I will, he murmured. He tried to sound steady, but his voice carried a tremor. It wasn't fear of the snake, it was something else entirely. The touch stayed with him long after she left. That small moment, the warmth of her hand on his arm, played in his mind again and again. For a man who had lived untouched for so long, it felt like a spark of something new and fragile. He didn't know what to call it, but he knew it mattered. As the days passed, their meetings continued. Sometimes they said little. Sometimes they talked for hours. The connection between them deepened in quiet ways, through shared silences, through looks, through small gestures that spoke more than words. Ethan found himself smiling at things that once meant nothing. He began to notice how good the world could look when seen beside someone else. Yet beneath it all, there was still caution. Ethan was a man used to keeping his distance, and Tala belonged to a people who had every reason to stay guarded. But neither could deny the pull that kept bringing them back to the same stretch of river each day. One evening, as the first stars appeared above the desert, Ethan watched Tala walk away through the fading light. He stood by the river long after she was gone, feeling the water move beside him. He didn't know where this strange friendship was heading, but he knew one thing with quiet certainty. His life had begun to change, one sunset at a time, because a girl by the river had decided not to step aside. The days rolled by with quiet rhythm, and the river became the center of Ethan's world. What had once been a place of silence now carried a new meaning. He no longer came there just to think or to be alone. He came because Tala might be there. And most days she was. Their meetings had turned into a kind of unspoken habit. There was no promise made between them, no plan. Yet somehow, they always seemed to appear at the same time. Just as the sunlight began to turn soft and the air cooled down from the heat of day, Ethan would walk down from his cabin with his hat low and his hands in his pockets, pretending he was there for no reason at all. But inside he knew why he came. Tala was often sitting by the riverbank weaving something from dry grass or cleaning the herbs she gathered. She would always look up and smile when she saw him. That small gesture made Ethan's heart feel lighter, like a man carrying a heavy load who suddenly realized he could breathe again. Their friendship grew in the simple, quiet way that real things often do. Ethan didn't know much about her life with her people, and she didn't ask too many questions about his past. They talked instead about what was right in front of them: the river, the wind, the clouds. Tala liked to tell him stories her grandfather had told her, stories of how the river was born from the tears of a sky spirit, or how the stars were the footprints of hunters chasing dreams across the night. Ethan would listen quietly, drawn in by the way her words painted the world with meaning. He often found himself smiling without realizing it. Once she noticed and laughed. "You smile like a man who forgot how," she said. He looked away, embarrassed. "Maybe I did." "Then you should practice more," she replied gently. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. But after that day, when he caught his reflection in the water, he tried to smile, awkward, small, but real. It had been years since he had seen that expression on his own face. Sometimes she teased him about his habits. She said he walked like the earth was made of glass, as if afraid to leave footprints. Other times she said he looked at the sky too much, like a man searching for something he'd lost. Ethan would only shrug. He wasn't used to being studied, especially not by someone who seemed to see so much. But Tala's way wasn't sharp or cruel. It was soft, like she simply wanted to understand him. One late afternoon, the sun hung low, turning the river into a line of gold. They sat near the same stone where they first met. The air smelled of wet clay and grass. Tala was braiding a cord of horsehair while Ethan watched the water. "You never told me why you live alone," she said suddenly, not looking up. He was quiet for a while before answering. "People talk too much. I guess I never fit in." "Maybe they talk because they are lonely," she said. "Silence can be heavy if no one shares it." Ethan thought about that. He had never seen silence as something heavy before. It had been his safety for so long that he hadn't realized how much it had kept him apart. He turned to her and said softly, "You don't seem afraid of silence." "I am not," she replied. "Silence is where truth hides. Most people don't listen long enough to hear it." He nodded, impressed by her words. She spoke like someone much older than her years. As the evening deepened, the sky turned violet. They watched the bats flicker above the water. It was then that Ethan noticed something unusual. He realized how close she was sitting. Her shoulder almost brushed his arm. He felt the warmth of her presence, the rhythm of her breathing. It wasn't something he was used to. He didn't move away, and she didn't either. When she stood to leave, the hem of her dress brushed against his hand. She turned slightly and looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Good night, Ethan," she said quietly. "Good night, Tala," he replied. She walked away, her steps soft in the sand. He sat there long after she disappeared. Something inside him had begun to change, not fast, not loud, but deep. It was as if a door had opened inside his heart, one he hadn't even known was locked. The next morning he woke early, before sunrise. He went outside and looked toward the hills where her people lived. The sky was still gray, but a faint orange light was rising. He thought of her words, her calm, her small smile. For the first time in years, he felt like life had something waiting for him beyond work and silence. That day, he fixed the fence near his corral and cleaned his cabin. He didn't know why, but he wanted the place to look different. Maybe because he was beginning to feel different. The world around him looked softer, more alive. Even the birds seemed louder that day. When evening came, he went to the river again. Tala was already there, sitting with her feet in the water. She looked up when she saw him, her eyes bright with welcome. "You came," she said. He smiled slightly. "Seems I keep ending up here." "Maybe the river is calling you," she said with a teasing tone. "Maybe it's calling both of us," he answered. She laughed, the sound light and clear. Then for a while they just sat together, saying nothing. The sound of the water filled the silence between them. It was peaceful. After a while, Tala asked, "Do you ever wish you could start your life again?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "I used to," he said. "But maybe I don't have to start again. Maybe I just need to start living now." Tala nodded, pleased with his answer. "Then you are learning what the river already knows. It never stops moving forward. It never begins again. It just keeps flowing." Her words stayed with him. As the evening grew darker, they began to walk along the bank together. The stars slowly appeared above them. Tala walked barefoot, and Ethan noticed how her feet left light prints in the sand that disappeared as the breeze moved over them. She seemed part of the land itself, free, sure, unshaken. Suddenly, Tala stopped and looked up at the sky. "Do you see that star?" she asked, pointing. He followed her finger. "The bright one?" "Yes, my grandfather says it's a guide star. It shows you where your heart belongs." Ethan smiled faintly. "And where does your heart belong?" She looked at him then, a quiet look, serious but kind. "Maybe I'm still finding out," she said. The moment lingered. The sound of the river, the smell of the earth, the shimmer of the starlight, it all felt like a soft spell. Ethan wanted to speak, to tell her that she had already given him more than she knew, but the words caught in his throat. When they reached the place where their paths split, Tala turned toward him. "Tomorrow?" she asked. He nodded. "Tomorrow." She smiled and walked away, her silhouette fading into the shadows of the trees. Ethan stood there watching until she was gone. That night, as he lay in bed, the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt full, of her voice, her laughter, the way she said his name. He realized that in all his years of wandering, he had never truly been seen. But Tala had seen him from the very first day, standing alone by the river. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that for the first time, he was no longer walking through life untouched. Someone had reached across the silence and taken his arm, not to hold him back, but to remind him that he still belonged somewhere. As summer deepened, the air grew hotter, and the land turned dry and golden. Yet each evening, when the sun began to fall, the river still shone like silver. It was there, in that soft hour of day, that Ethan and Tala met again and again, like the world itself had arranged their paths to cross. By now, the people who lived nearby had started to notice. The ranch hands who came through town spoke quietly of that quiet man who spends too much time near the Apache River. Some said it was strange. Others shrugged, saying maybe he'd finally found someone to talk to. Ethan didn't pay much attention to what anyone thought. For the first time in years, his heart felt calm, and he wasn't about to let that go. But he worried about Tala. He didn't want his presence to cause her trouble with her people. He knew how easily small-town whispers could grow. So one evening, as they sat near the water, he asked her, "Do your people mind that you meet me here?" Tala glanced up from the basket she was weaving. Her expression stayed calm, but her voice carried a hint of truth that made him listen closely. "Some talk," she said. "They say I spend too much time by the river. They wonder why I speak to a man who doesn't belong to my people." Ethan lowered his eyes. "Then maybe I should stay away for a while. I don't want to make things hard for you." She looked at him, her dark eyes steady. "You don't make things hard, Ethan. You make them clearer." He frowned slightly. "Clearer?" "Yes," she said. "When people talk, I learn who listens to their hearts and who only listens to fear." He didn't know how to reply. Her calmness unsettled him. It was strength, but it came from a place he didn't understand. He realized then that she wasn't just kind. She was brave. Brave in ways he had never been. For a long moment, they sat in silence. The air was cool, and a soft wind moved through the trees. Then, quietly, Ethan began to talk, something he hadn't done in years. He told her about his childhood, about his father who had worked hard but drank harder, about the nights when shouting filled the house and how even as a boy he had learned to stay quiet to stay safe. He spoke of his mother's tired eyes the day she passed and how he had left home young, choosing loneliness over pain. Tala didn't interrupt. She didn't offer empty comfort or pity. She just listened, her eyes on him, her hands resting on her knees. When he finally stopped speaking, she said softly, "You have carried too much silence. The river can hold some of it for you." Her words were simple, but they stayed with him. The next day, Ethan went about his chores, but something inside him had shifted. He realized how much lighter he felt, as if the quiet between them had washed something clean inside him. That evening, he went to the river early, long before sunset. He wanted to see the world in daylight the way Tala always did, with open eyes. He watched how the sunlight broke into tiny stars across the water, how the reeds bent but never broke under the wind, how the earth smelled sweet even when it was dry. For years, He had walked through this same land, seeing nothing but emptiness. Now he saw life everywhere. When Tala arrived, she noticed the difference in him right away. "You look less heavy," she said with a teasing smile. He chuckled softly. "Maybe I am. Maybe the river's doing its work." They sat side by side, again, and as the sky turned red and gold, the moment felt like something sacred. Tala reached into her satchel and brought out a small charm made of feathers and beads. "This is for you," she said. "It keeps travelers safe." Ethan looked at it, touched by the gift. "You made this?" She nodded. "With my grandmother. Every traveler should carry one. You have walked alone too long." He held the charm carefully. "I don't know what to say." "Just keep it," she said softly. "That's enough." He nodded, slipping it into his pocket. His throat felt tight. Words never came easy for him, but he hoped she understood that he was grateful. As the weeks went by, their bond grew stronger. They talked more, laughed more, and began to share small parts of their days. Ethan would tell her when he mended a fence, or when the horses broke loose. Tala would tell him about her grandmother's old songs and the herbs she used to heal cuts or fevers. Their worlds were different, but somehow, when they sat together, the difference didn't matter. Yet beneath the peace of their friendship, there was still something neither could name. Ethan began to notice the small things more. The way Tala's eyes caught the light, the sound of her laughter, the gentle way she moved through the world. It made his chest ache in a way that wasn't painful, just full. One evening, when the air carried the cool promise of rain, Tala arrived looking troubled. Her steps were slower, her eyes clouded. Ethan stood when he saw her. "Something wrong?" he asked quietly. She hesitated before answering. "My uncle says I should not come here anymore," she said. "He says it is not our way." Ethan's chest tightened. "Because of me?" She looked away. "He fears things he doesn't understand." Ethan's voice dropped low. "Then maybe you should listen to him." Tala turned her eyes on him again, sharp and clear. "And should I also fear what I understand?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" She took a small step closer, close enough that he could see the light catch in her eyes. "I understand kindness. I understand truth. Those things are not wrong." He wanted to say something, to tell her how much she meant to him, how much she had changed his world, but he couldn't find the right words. All he managed was a quiet, "You've been good to me, Tala. I don't deserve it." She shook her head slowly. "You don't need to deserve kindness, Ethan. You only need to accept it." Rain began to fall softly then, small drops making ripples in the river. Neither of them moved. They stood there side by side as the sky darkened and the sound of water filled the air. For a long time, they said nothing. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, warm, alive. When the rain grew stronger, Tala finally turned to go. Before leaving, she reached out and touched his arm gently. Her hand lingered there for a heartbeat. "Don't stop walking here," she said. "Even if I am not here one day, the river will be. It will remember." He wanted to tell her that it wasn't the river he came for anymore. It was her. But the words caught in his throat again, so he only nodded. As she walked away into the rain, Ethan stood watching her figure fade between the trees. The sound of the water grew louder, mixing with the wind. He stayed there until the sky turned black. That night, back in his cabin, he couldn't sleep. The charm she had given him hung by his bedside, and the sound of the rain on the roof reminded him of her voice. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if he would see her again soon, but he knew one thing for certain. She had become part of his life in a way that no one ever had before. He realized now that Tala wasn't just someone who had stopped him at the river. She was the one who had stopped his loneliness, who had shown him that even the quietest lives could be touched by something gentle, something true. And though the rain fell hard outside, Ethan smiled softly in the dark, his heart calm for the first time in years. Autumn came quietly to the desert. The long grass turned pale and the air grew cooler in the evenings. The river, which once shimmered under the bright sun, now flowed slow and calm beneath a sky of fading gold. Ethan still walked there every day. It had become part of him, like breathing. He didn't always see Tala anymore. Some evenings she came, some evenings she didn't. But he went anyway because the place where they had shared their words and silences felt alive with her presence. He could almost hear her laughter in the wind, see her reflection in the moving water. The river had become their meeting ground, their witness. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the hills, Ethan sat on the same smooth stone he had first found her near. The sky burned with colors, orange, red, violet. He ran his hand across the surface of the stone, thinking of all the days they had shared there. The charm she had given him still hung from his neck, tied with a thin strip of leather. Whenever the wind blew, he could hear its faint rattle, a sound that reminded him he wasn't completely alone anymore. He thought about the things Tala had taught him, the way to listen to silence, the patience to see meaning in small moments, the courage to let someone close. She had changed his world without asking for anything. For a man who had once lived untouched by love or friendship, she had become proof that kindness could still find its way even into the hardest hearts. After a while, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw her walking down the slope, her long hair loose, her dress moving with the breeze. He stood up, smiling softly. "Didn't think you'd come today," he said. "I told you I would come," she replied. "The river told me you were waiting." He chuckled quietly. "That river of yours seems to know too much." "It knows what hearts try to hide," she said with a teasing look. They sat together again, the way they always did. The silence between them was easy now, comfortable like an old song. After some time, Tala spoke, her tone thoughtful. "My uncle has decided to move north for the winter. The camp will leave in 2 days." Ethan's smile faded slightly. "You're leaving?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, my people travel with the season. The river will still be here when I return, but I don't know when that will be." He looked down at the ground, feeling something tighten in his chest. The thought of losing her made the world suddenly feel smaller. "I see," he said quietly. "That's good. You'll be with your family." She studied his face. "And you? Will you stay here walking alone again?" "I've been alone most of my life," he said softly. "I guess I know how, but do you want to?" She asked gently. He didn't answer right away. The question wasn't simple. He had lived with loneliness so long that he'd almost accepted it as part of who he was. But after meeting Tala, he knew what it felt like to have someone see him, talk to him, care. He didn't want to lose that light. "I don't know how to be anything else," he finally said. Tala's eyes softened. "You already are something else," she said. "You listen. You care, you smile. You learn to speak again. That's not loneliness anymore." He looked at her then, realizing she was right. The man he had been before, cold, closed, quiet, wasn't the man sitting beside her now. She had given him back his voice without even meaning to. When the first stars appeared, they both stood. The air was cool, carrying the scent of water and dust. "Will you come tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, I'll come to say goodbye." He wanted to ask her not to go, to say she could stay or that he could follow, but he didn't. He respected her world, her freedom, her choice. He knew that what they shared didn't need to be forced to be real. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat outside his cabin, staring at the horizon where the moon rose. He thought about the road ahead, about the quiet days that would come after she left. But instead of sadness, he felt something different: gratitude. He had met someone who had touched his life with gentleness, and that was something many people never found. The next evening, he reached the river early. The sky was pale pink, the air still. He waited, watching the reflection of the clouds move across the surface of the water. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. Tala was carrying a small clay bowl covered with leaves. She came close and placed it beside him. "This is for you," she said. "It's food from my people. Corn, beans, and herbs. It will keep you strong when you are tired." He looked at it, then at her. "You didn't have to bring me anything." "I wanted to," she said simply. Ethan took a deep breath. "I don't know how to thank you for all of this. For every day, every word." Tala smiled faintly. "You already did. You listened. You were kind. That's thanks enough." They stood side by side for a long moment. The river moved quietly around them. Tala reached into her pouch and took out a small piece of polished stone, smooth and shining. She placed it in his hand. "This stone has been in the river for many years," she said. "It carries the memory of water. Keep it with you so you don't forget." Ethan closed his hand around it. "I won't." When she stepped closer, the distance between them felt smaller than ever. "The world is wide, Ethan," she said softly. "Maybe our paths will cross again. Maybe not. But wherever you walk, the river will still flow beside you." He nodded, his throat tight. "I'll keep walking," he said. "And I'll remember." Tala smiled, her eyes shining in the fading light. "Then I've taught you what I came to teach." A soft wind blew, lifting her hair, and for a moment she looked like part of the river itself, free, untamed, and peaceful. She gave him one last look, then turned and began to walk toward the trees. Ethan stood there watching her go. The sky deepened to orange, then red, then dark blue. He didn't move until the first star appeared. When he finally walked home, the world around him felt quiet but not empty. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl, the steady hum of crickets felt alive. He realized that Tala had left something behind that would never fade. Days turned to weeks, and the season changed again. The mornings grew colder, the nights longer. Ethan still visited the river every evening. Sometimes he talked softly, as if she might hear him. Sometimes he just listened. The charm still hung from his neck. The stone still rested in his pocket, smooth and warm from the touch of his hand. The loneliness that once surrounded him had softened into peace. He still lived alone, but it was no longer an emptiness. It was a quiet life filled with memories that gave meaning to each day. The people who passed through the area often saw him by the river and would wave. Some said he looked different now, still quiet, but with a calmness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A few even said they'd seen him smiling to himself as he watched the sunset. Ethan never told them why. Some things didn't need to be explained. They just lived inside a person, like the sound of water under the earth. Years later, when people spoke of him, they said he was the man who lived by the river, the one who always kept a small charm on his chest and a stone in his pocket. No one really knew the story behind it. But those who saw him often said there was something peaceful about him, something steady and kind, and maybe in some quiet way, the river did remember. The man who had once wandered alone, untouched by the world, until the day an Apache girl stopped him at the water's edge and held his arm. From that moment on, his life was never the same. The river had found its listener, and the lonely man had found his place in the world.